Mike Burgmaier, how are you? Whipstich Capital over here. Great to have you here. How's BevNet Live going so far for you?
It's great. It's great. Always fantastic networking, great information. I've been coming here, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years now, and it just gets better and better.
I'm sure people love to see you walk in the room. This is the guy who can make things happen. And
we'll see. We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you found anything interesting so far? Or?
Yeah, a couple of new beverage brands, kind of disrupting some categories and some categories that have kind of seen some failed innovation over the past few years, and maybe there's kind of finally the solution to it. So some interesting things. Yeah.
Right. So this seems like maybe an obvious question, but sort of what are the main things that you're looking for? Does it have to be disruptive? Can it just be improving on an already existing idea? What's the main thing you would look for in terms of an investment?
Yeah, I actually think that improving on an existing idea can be disruptive in its own. There's just some core tenets that we have to see. For us to take on a client, we raise capital, we sell companies, we like to see a minimum of 5 to 10 million of trailing 12-month sales. So it's like, what's the quality of that revenue? Like, what's the sales per point? What's the velocity gain when it goes on promotion? What's the new baseline sales after promotion? The things, but on a product, yeah, it's got to be different. It's got to be unique. But maybe it's a product that is just a little bit better, and someone, maybe the original innovator in a category, they created the category, but the new one is that much better, but perhaps with a better brand. Maybe that's more mainstream, more palatable to the average consumer, and it's got a larger overall opportunity in the end.
And we're seeing, it seems like I've noticed that there's been proliferation of brands who seem to be crossing over in different categories that are both functional and, say, hydration or better for you and all that. Will there be more segmentation, or do you think it'll be more these brands that sort of have a little bit of everything included with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually think that, I was just on a panel with Matthew Mitchell from Coca-Cola, and it's actually one of the things he talked about. He said he'd like to get away from kind of the definitions of categories. I think that you're going to see brands that can travel and brands that should travel. So that's just such an important thing when someone creates a brand on the early side. Where does that brand have permission to go? I often think about it, and think about, like, all right, where the consumer is today with this product. Well, if Coke or Pepsi or Nestle Waters, General Mills, someone wants to buy you, well, they want to have a billion-dollar brand in perpetuity. So customer tastes will change. Everything can evolve, but can that brand be the central tenet, that brand promise, that core? Can that revolve around where customers go and the consumers go? And so, it's interesting. I was thinking about, like, why is General Mills here? Okay, well, Tio, it's a soup, but they're also in Epic Provisions, and I had a nice bone broth last week, so I was like, oh yeah, they do have beverage.
Right. Well, another thing I'm personally curious about, and as I see different brands, is the sort of importing of beverages from outside of the States, bringing them into the States and sort of adapting them or sort of explaining them to the American consumer. Right. Are you noticing anything? Does it seem to be more prevalent than it used to be, or have those brands been successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. I certainly am seeing a lot more companies contacting us, might be from Australia, might be over in Europe, and they're seeing the large market in the U.S. and they're looking to come in and do that. And it's interesting because, again, it gets back to brand. I think in a lot of ways it might be a great product, but sometimes I see brands that are highly defined by an ingredient. And when I see that, it's, for me, at least, it's a red flag early on. But then also, like, well, then, what's the ownership structure of that company right now, and where can they really go? And are they trying to create a JV in the U.S. that's separate from the corporate entity? And will that be attractive to investors? I think there's a lot of things that haven't been thought through sometimes when I see that. But it's certainly, I think everyone sees the wide range of consumers here and the dollars that are here and the willingness to pay from the U.S. consumer, for a functional beverage or just a better beverage.
Right. And you mentioned, basing it around an ingredient. It's not an ingredient, but probiotics obviously is something that's doing really well right now. Sort of, how do you see that going? I mean, we saw obviously the Kavita deal made a lot of headlines. Sort of, how has that impacted the category and sort of the beverage world, and seeing Pepsi make a big investment in probiotics.
Right, yeah. So we obviously worked, Nick McCoy and I at Whipstich worked on the Kavita transaction. And I mean, it's at the core here, we've got a functional beverage, with the probiotic base that delivers, real true benefits and functionality, but in a refreshing manner and with low calories. So you've got a great benefit and you've kind of got a low cost, personal cost or fitness cost or just health cost to it. So it and a brand, Kavita, that's about vitality. So again, the brand has that ability to expand long term, and you got a flavor profile that is very accessible, not to like, the hardcore, maybe die-hard kombucha fan that needs that bite, which is fantastic, and I love products like that, but I might be part of 1 or 2% of the country, whereas something that can be more palatable to a larger audience, but have that benefit. I think probiotics are here to stay. The microbiome is here to stay. The personalization of beverages and food and healthcare is here to stay. So,
sure.
Finding those brands and the products that can cross and travel with that is incredibly important.
And I know you're not in the lab innovating for Kavita itself, but as we see, say, Tropicana, which came out with a orange juice that had enhanced with probiotics,
right.
Does that create the need for Kavita or a similar probiotic-focused brand to sort of continue innovating as other companies just use it as a ingredient to add on to the drinks that already exist, such as orange juice?
Yeah, I think companies like Kavita, or brands like Kavita, I should say now, do need to continue to innovate. And if you looked at Kavita 5 years ago, just as that kind of, now I just say the core line, the core sparkling probiotic beverage line. Then they went to they created the tonics with the apple cider vinegar. They created the Master Brew Kombucha line. Kavita is the tie-in among all that. And if you think about the flavor profiles and the benefits and differences of that, and the taste profiles, it's a small adjacent move, but it's still very core to the brand. And you're not creating confusion. I think if if Pepsi then took Kavita and said, well, Kavita is probiotics, now we're going to do an orange juice with probiotics, it's not going to work. And they're not going to do that. But I hope they don't do that.
Okay. Well, obviously you're on the equity side of things, and that's always a big sort of topic and concern is when is the right time to make that next step? When do you know that, you're ready to take on investment and some of the challenges that those bring? What are some general advice you may have for brands on sort of when to explore that option?
Right. It's a good question. And there's no pat answer to that or standard answer. I mean, for us, we like to see a minimum of 5 to 10 million trailing 12-month sales, but we want to talk to companies well before that, and we'll break our rules. We worked with Spindrift, for example, Nick and I did over time, and they were much smaller than that when we started working with them, but there was something that was innovative, it was breakthrough, there was a core team behind it or a core personality that you could believe in, that you could trust in, and a unique product. But if you're going to take on venture capital, private equity, or really any capital, you really have to ask yourself, okay, this is no longer my company. I have to also answer for shareholders, and that's important too. So, what's your long-term goal? And if you do take institutional capital, you're on a timeline right now. If it's a venture capital private equity firm, because they're going to have to get out at some point in time. And does that align with your timing? And also the type of investor you bring in, even if it's just venture capital itself. Sure. Is there going to be alignment on values and what you want to create?
Well,
decision making.
As soon as I bring up timing, I get the word that we're out of time.
That was quick.
Awesome. Great having you here, Michael.
Thanks, Marty.
Really great conversation, and let's catch up again soon.